from global governance to global government, structural evolution, and societal control mechanisms. Introduction. Global governance refers to the system of international rules, institutions, and processes that guide cooperation among states and other actors in addressing issues that transcend national boundaries. While commonly presented as a decentralized and voluntary framework, critics and some political theorists argue that global governance can evolve, intentionally or organically, into a centralized form of authority resembling global government. This paper explores how this transformation may occur through a gradual, technocratic layering of power structures and enforcement mechanisms that may evade democratic accountability and public consent. Global governance as a framework for global government. Global governance is typically justified as a necessary response to global problems, climate change, pandemics, migration, cybercrime, and financial instability. It involves international institutions, for example the United Nations, World Health Organization, International Monetary Fund, multilateral treaties, and transnational regulatory bodies. These structures lack sovereign power, but they increasingly influence national policies. However, when global governance becomes institutionalized with standard-setting power, dispute resolution mechanisms, and surveillance capacity, it begins to resemble government in function, if not in name. Decision-making may shift from national legislatures to international forums, with technocrats, not elected officials, shaping outcomes. Gradualism as strategy. This transformation often occurs incrementally. Soft law becomes hard law through norm internalization. Treaties evolve into binding regimes. Temporary crises justify long-term structural reforms. This gradual evolution reduces systemic shock. A sudden imposition of centralized global control would provoke resistance. Slow integration, by contrast, is more palatable and less noticeable, especially when framed as pragmatic or humanitarian. Technocratic control and the role of public perception. The evolution from governance to government depends not just on laws or institutions, but on shaping the public's perception of legitimacy. Here, mass media plays a central role. The media as a normalization tool. Billionaire-funded media conglomerates increasingly set the boundaries of acceptable discourse, defining what constitutes rational, safe, or dangerous thought. Critics of global governance policies may be labeled as conspiracy theorists, extremists, or threats to democracy, delegitimizing dissent. This marginalization can occur even when critiques are grounded in credible institutional concerns, for example, democratic deficit, loss of sovereignty, medicalization of dissent. In parallel, medical institutions and psychological classifications can be used, intentionally or not, as tools of depoliticization. Individuals raising objections to prevailing global narratives may be labeled as mentally unwell. Diagnostic manuals and behavioral health frameworks may be weaponized to pathologize nonconformity, particularly when dissent is framed as paranoia, anxiety, or delusion. Historically, this echoes abuses seen in authoritarian regimes where psychiatry was used as a political tool, for example Soviet-era practices. Enforcement architecture, police and military hierarchies. The global governance framework, while administrative and bureaucratic at its core, is supported by a domestic enforcement pyramid, policing dissent. The police functions as the first level of enforcement, responding to civil unrest or protests, especially those that challenge global governance-related mandates, for example lockdowns, digital ID rollouts. Individuals who believe force is the only remaining option to confront the state apparatus, and are met with proportionate or overwhelming police response. Military as a backstop. If civil unrest exceeds police capacity, the military may be deployed, typically under states of emergency or national threat declarations. Under certain models, for example martial law or continuity of government protocols, military intervention ensures continuity of the system, irrespective of public will. This escalation pathway, media marginalization, medical labeling, police action, and military backup, creates a layered control structure that protects the framework of global governance and, potentially, global government, public consent, and the illusion of choice. One of the core critiques is that this framework evolves without genuine public knowledge or consent. Legal mechanisms, such as international treaties, executive orders, and technocratic rulemaking often bypass direct democratic input. Global compacts and regulatory alignments may not be put to referendum or national debate. Digital infrastructure, for example vaccine passports, central bank digital currencies, biometric ID systems can be embedded in daily life before the public fully understands their implications. This creates a situation where people live within a governance structure they did not vote for, and where resistance is interpreted as instability rather than legitimate grievance. Language as a weapon, psychological manipulation in the march toward global government. In the modern geopolitical arena, language is no longer just a tool of communication. It is a weapon of control. Carefully crafted rhetoric, media narratives, and selective terminology form the foundation of propaganda and psychological operations designed to steer public perception. Politicians and international institutions, often backed by transnational corporate interests, deploy gaslighting techniques, tactical and strategic silence, and manufactured crises to shape consensus and redefine reality. Programs once dismissed as conspiracy, such as MKUltra, serve as blueprints for modern psychological warfare, now sanitized, institutionalized, and disseminated globally through media, education, and policy. The public is rarely aware of how their emotions, fears, and values are being engineered, sold to them as progress, safety, or solidarity. This subtle programming conditions populations to accept increasing control, eroded national sovereignty, and surveillance, all under the guise of global cooperation, ultimately leading the herd toward a centralized global governance structure without meaningful resistance. Conclusion: governance or government. While global governance is not, in itself, equivalent to global government, the infrastructure, ideology, and enforcement mechanisms it develops can lay the groundwork for centralized global authority, particularly if layered without transparency or moral safeguards. The convergence of media control, institutional normalization, and force hierarchies raises questions about where cooperation ends and control begins. Academic and policy inquiry should remain vigilant to these shifts, not from a place of paranoia, but from a commitment to democratic integrity, sovereignty, and the preservation of human rights in the age of global interdependence.